in most cases, actually, almost in all cases, we are inviting that risk into our lives, meaning we're the ones doing something that is now putting everything else that we've built at risk. And it's not a bad thing. The answer is not to lock yourself in your house and not do anything and not take any chances because we're afraid of what might happen. We still need to go out and live our lives the way we choose to live them. But it's really about on the back end, making sure that we're transferring the appropriate risk so that if something happens because of the way we choose to live our lives, we are now, we're able to be protected and continue to live our life. That's the biggest thing, is we want to continue to live that lifestyle even if something happens.
Hey, what's going on, cash flow hackers? It's Chris with Life 180, and I am here again with Nick Obi from Risk Manager. And today we're going to be talking about the 5 biggest threats to your wealth. Now, these are not the traditional threats that I talk about on this channel, like inflation and taxes and market risk and all these things, sequence of return risk and all that stuff. Those are all important, but we're going to be talking about today more things on the other side that have the ability, due to mistakes, errors, accidents, things that you ultimately have in your life that are exposing you to potentially have your wealth taken from you in other ways. And I don't even want to spoil the conversation here because Nick is an expert at this. And so what I want to do is basically say, Nick, thanks for being here. And I'm going to turn it over to you. You're you're an expert at this stuff. And so I'm going to just kind of sit back and listen. He sent me this list and I was like, oh, this is beautiful. So I'm going to have him kind of do the teaching. And as I have questions, I'm going to engage and ask him.
Chris, what is going on? Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, man.
It's good to be on again. I started following you like a year and a half ago. So it's cool that we actually get to do this now.
It's awesome.
So I appreciate you having me on. So the risks to your wealth that you talked about typically are a little bit more exciting when you go to a part, like people want to hear about inflation. They want to hear about, how can I protect it against, how can I hedge inflation? What can I do with my money? For some reason, we don't get the same love. We don't get the same traction. We're typically like, doomsday kind of pushed aside. People don't want to hear about it because it's the risks, the risks that threaten your success and your ability to continue to kind of pursue your purpose in life. They're not fun to talk about because we hope they never happen to us.
Totally.
And they're, I don't know, it's typically, we'll dive into the list here, but they're typically what's going to happen is that somebody's coming after you for financial compensation for, either damage to their property, you injured them, or you allegedly did one of those things. So now you're in a position where you have to defend yourself, which takes resources. And if it's proven that you actually owe them for those damages, you now have to pay out. And that's where your wealth really becomes exposed. And as we kind of go through this list, that's how we want to kind of view and see this risk is what is the threat to our success, our wealth, not so much what's the threat to our property or the thing that we own.
So let me interrupt here because as you're saying that, I think about it. So I got a buddy who works at Department of Homeland Security, right? And so his job is to assess the threat assessments, right, to national security. Like, what are the greatest potential real shutdown threats that people would have to potentially be locked up? And when you think of the preppers, like when you get locked in your house basically for a week or two, and are you prepared? Do you have enough food and water and stuff like that for a week? And he, we're talking and he's like, everybody likes to talk about a terrorist threat, right? Everybody likes to talk about like all these sexy topics that like get headlines and stuff. He goes, the biggest threat is a snowstorm. That's the biggest threat. Like honestly, he goes, the worst. Is it really? Threat, yep. The worst threat is a bad snowstorm that rips through Washington, D.C. all the way through New York. And they've done this. They've had and so this is just a little inside information from the Department of Homeland Security here. Yeah. But he said that.
We're going to get flagged?
No, exactly. But that's what he does. But he's like, but nobody wants to hear about that. Like nobody realizes like prepping, right, is like everybody's doing it because they think, the government's going to take our guns or they're going to do this or do that. And, we're going to have a terrorism threat or something like that. But no, you should be prepping because of there's a lot of things that just our environment causes us some risk exposure that whether we like it or not, we're exposed to. Right. And so I think the correlation there is what you're talking about is like all these other things are these like sexy topics that are outside of our control, and they're just kind of like out there and they're fun to talk about, at least for me.
Right. No, I would agree.
But what you're talking about is like, we all live life and we do things day in, day out. But a lot of times we don't realize it, but we have exposure behind every action. Granted, it's maybe marginal or minimal, but if that one thing happens because we're doing it constantly, or we have, I don't want to say it because you're going to get into it, but like, I'm going to just say, if you have a dog, for instance, that
Spoiler.
dog, right? That dog is a risk. And, you know, I mean, when I was 12 years old, I got bit by a like, it was a mutt, but it was like a mix between like a pit bull and a Doberman and like whatever. And it was my neighbor's dog. And I remember going up and the dog just lashed onto me. I still have a scar on my thigh and it was nasty. And luckily for him, my family is not a litigious family, you know, but like we could have sued the crap out of him.
Oh, totally. Well, and he's lucky too that the accident, you know, wasn't that severe, because that's the other thing that it typically leads to it. So so you make awesome points on that. I just want to touch on the snowstorm thing real quick, because I'm from the Northeast. I live in New Hampshire. We ski up in Maine.
Yeah,
I didn't freaking know that. Typically, it's like, hey, we're getting 8 inches of snow tomorrow. Let's drive up during the first 2 inches so we can hit the slopes, you know, and get the fresh snow up there. We're not thinking like we're going to be locked in the house for weeks at a time. So I'll have to keep that in mind.
Yep.
And then back to the actual, you know, the risk that we were talking about. You're spot on in that the risk that we're talking about here, typically, in most cases, actually, almost in all cases, we are inviting that risk into our lives, meaning we're the ones doing something that is now putting everything else that we've built at risk. And it's not a bad thing. The answer is not to lock yourself in your house and not do anything and not take any chances because we're afraid of what might happen. We still need to go out and live our lives the way we choose to live them. But it's really about, on the back end, making sure that we're transferring the appropriate risk so that if something happens because of the way we choose to live our lives, we are now, you know, we're able to be protected and continue to live our life. That's the biggest thing, is we want to continue to live that lifestyle even if something happens. It's going to be, you know, bad enough if something does happen. That dog bite, if it was more serious.
Yeah.
If
he got my neck or something like that.
Correct.
Right.
And now it's a family friend, right? It's your neighbor. So that is hard enough on the owner. It probably ate him up for a while, even though it was just your leg.
Yep.
On top of that, if his house was on the line, his assets were on the line, it's this like multiplier effect. Is typically the accident, for the most part, we're all pretty good people. We don't want to see somebody get attacked by a dog. You know, we don't want to see that. But if that happens, we also now want to make sure that we're protected and that we can now help that person through whatever, you know, in your example, if it was a serious injury, make sure that there's enough funds there to cover your medical bills, to make sure you make a fast recovery. And you don't necessarily want that to be your assets that are on the line. Right. So that's kind of what we're talking about here. On the dog bite one, it's no particular order, but that was the first one we had on the list. So, and I think we've kind of hit on it, but most people, they don't think, when they get a puppy, they're not thinking about, wow, I just invited this massive liability into my life.
A cute little German Shepherd, right?
Yeah, exactly.
That's adorable.
My dog's actually named Liability.
Stop it. That'd be awesome.
Maybe the next dog. It's
exactly.
No, we've got a dog named Moose. And even I'm in this business. When we got him, he was this 8-week-old Bernese Mountain Dog puppy, which, you know, I'm biased.
Oh, those are
like
adorable. Yeah, they're great.
And I'm not thinking like, well, what if this dog bites somebody and you know, now I have to deal with all that. You're excited you got this puppy. Mm-hmm. And so that's the thought process that I think you need to, not everyone's going to do it every single time, but you need to start thinking about these things. As I add something into my life, like a puppy, what risk is that then also, what comes with that? And am I comfortable with it? If you are, still get the puppy, but then also make sure you're transferring the risk on the back end.
Yeah.
The next one I had a list was domestic staff. And I think for a long time, and it sounds fancy, right? But we're talking about, you know, anybody that you have in the house, nannies.
We've talked about, housekeepers, which you don't have to be wealthy to have a housekeeper, you know.
Correct. And I think when people say domestic staff, they think of like, you know, the stuff you're like, we watched the show Dynasty a lot. Yeah, like you got the butler, you got 7, chefs in the home.
Jeffrey from Prince of Bel-Air back in the day. Remember that?
Exactly. I think they're remaking that.
They are. I haven't seen it, but yeah.
I haven't seen it yet either. But yeah, and especially I think with COVID, we saw more and more people now. Their kids are learning at home, so now they're having nannies come in. So it just all of a sudden it kind of propelled, and there's risks associated with that, and really how you design it. So it goes back to all of this. Really goes to the strategy you have in place. So if the nanny, if it's hired by a company, if they're providing the insurance, if it's truly an independent contractor that is providing you all the necessary documentation, that's one thing. But if you're hiring them on your own and you're bringing them into the house, now there's all sorts of other risks that are really entering there. And a couple of top ones are if they're injured on the job, it's a state requirement that you take care of their injuries. You're even though you're not a corporation or a business, you're an employer at that point, even though you don't think about it because it's a nanny that you have for 10 hours a week. Another part is any HR related issues. So sexual harassment, discrimination, wrongful termination. Again, we don't think about it, but that nanny is an employee of our household, and they have the same rights that any employee would have of any business. And so if they come after you for something like that, you are now, again, responsible to defend yourself, which costs money.
Yep.
And if you lose and you're awarded, the nanny is awarded damages, you have to pay those. So that's kind of the components of it. It's not so much, the nanny rolled her ankle. That's never, you're going to throw ice on it and she or he was going to be all set and you're going to move on. Questions on that one?
No, I mean, I think it makes sense. I'm going to have questions, I think, once we get through. Yeah, no, not yet, but I have a question I'm thinking about, but I want to save it until the end of all of them. So yeah.
Okay. The next one I had is recreational vehicles and watercraft. Now, this is the fun stuff, right? You've got ATVs, snowmobiles, golf carts, jet skis, boats, whatever it is, whatever you're into. This is one of the biggest issues we see here is that most times these go underinsured because there's no state requirements to get insurance on it. I guess it depends on the state. I live in New Hampshire. We don't even need car insurance. It's like live free or die.
Nice.
So it could depend on the state, but where I'm from, you don't need it. If you think about a house, if you're buying a house with a mortgage, the mortgage company is the one that triggers the insurance policy.
Yeah.
So the other component to it is depending what you're buying. If you're buying a used ATV and it's $3,500, a lot of people look at that and say, well, I'm not going to insure it. The thing's 10 years old. If something happens to it, I'll just replace it. I'm not concerned about it. I'll fix it up. It has nothing to do with the actual physical damage to the ATV or the watercraft.
Got it.
Something in my eye here, excuse me. It has nothing to do with the damage to that. It's somebody getting injured through using it. You hit somebody while using it. Somebody falls off the back and gets injured, and now they're coming after you for those damages and those injuries. That's where most people are exposed because, again, unless the setup and the strategy is designed correctly, there's typically not coverage for that under your standard home insurance or umbrella policy. So it's understanding what am I doing? What am I inviting into my life? An ATV, golf cart. And then how does that now impact the overall strategy that I have in place? And what do I need to think about to make sure I'm protecting myself?
That's awesome.
I guess it would be the fourth one here. Number 4, vehicle use.
Yep.
There's so many ways you could go with this. There's your own use of the vehicle, right? You driving your own car. Most people, when they're thinking about it, an accident, they're thinking about or they're concerned with damage to the vehicle that they're in, their own car. That's not a huge threat to your wealth. If you're driving $40,000 to $80,000 car, if something happens to the actual car, it's insured incorrectly, it's not insured at all, that's not going to totally derail or destroy your lifestyle. You're going to find a way to get the car either repaired, get a new car, and you're probably not going to be happy. You're probably going to be kind of pissed off, but it's not going to sink you. It's not going to destroy the plan that you have for your overall success, wealth, and lifestyle that you're trying to create. On the flip side, injuring somebody else in a car accident, whether it's a passenger in your vehicle or you hit another vehicle, hit a pedestrian, and that person's significantly injured, That's the part that they're coming after you. And again, it's the same theme with all this. You have to pay to defend yourself, and then also pay for the damages if they're awarded. And so with vehicle use, often what we see is insufficient or not, essentially not enough policy limit.
Underinsured.
Yeah, that's a better way to put it. You can tell I'm talking too much because I can't think of the fancy words.
Yep. Yep.
So even the states, like I was saying before, New Hampshire doesn't require insurance. There's the neighboring state here, Massachusetts, they require insurance, but the limit that they require is 20,000.
Okay.
I mean, that's it. What's that going to replace? That
Yeah.
half the car,
Totally.
I don't think you can even do that, but anyway, you get the point.
Well, and then the question is like, so it was like maybe 9-10 years ago, or no, it was more than that. It was probably 2007 is my guess. I was actually in an accident in Arizona with an illegal immigrant from Mexico.
Okay.
Who didn't have any insurance.
Yep.
And so I had to make sure that I had the right coverage on my end, not because of my exposure to them, but because to make sure that if somebody that hit me, that I was covered for them not being insured, if that makes sense, right? And so that's like, I never even thought, thank God it wasn't a horrible accident or whatever, but, and the coverage that I will say I was underinsured for like the potential ramifications, right? Luckily it wasn't a really bad situation. And luckily the coverage I had covered my issue, but the bottom line is it was like a real thing. I mean, and this wasn't a little thing. This was a highway accident, it ended up like nobody got hurt, but the cars were totally messed up. Right. And it was, she didn't speak English. She was totally just out of her element, cause it was a pretty good accident. Her car got pretty banged up. She kind of turned lanes and hit me and like, whatever, but it's just one of those things, like I didn't realize that was a thing. And so that's another area where it just goes to show you the importance of the right coverage and understanding what your coverage is, is a big deal.
Absolutely. And, it all goes back to the strategy. What are you trying to accomplish?
Yeah.
Most people just go out and buy insurance.
Yep.
You need to have a strategy before you do that. What is it you're looking to protect?
Yeah.
And then what's your strategy to do that? And, underinsured and uninsured motorists is a huge one. And it's crazy that most people don't think that, wait, I have to protect myself in case somebody else hits me and they didn't take the steps to protect themselves. And that's exactly it.
Yeah.
On the vehicle thing, just a few other quick things to hit. Household members, who are you giving a car to? Do you have in-laws living with you? Do you have kids in college and now you're in one state and they're in a different state? Most people's, I heard all the time growing up, and I didn't think anything of it until I got in the business. Well, hey, we didn't tell our insurance company that Johnny's in school 5 states away because we don't want our rates to go up. That's great. Your rates probably won't go up, but they're also probably not going to cover the claim when Johnny's with his college buddies and, whatever, they run somebody over on the campus.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's this balance of like, well, yeah, you want your rates to go up, but you also want the strategy and the policy to do what it's supposed to do. So household members, teenage drivers, that's a huge one. There's always a debate on how to do it. Put them on their own policy, separate them out from you if they're their own entity. However, if you're still paying their bills, they still live in your house. If it's a significant accident and you're in court, there's no separation. It's you and your assets on the line. And then the other big thing is rental vehicles. People go on vacation. They don't even think twice about it. They rent the car for $20 online. Show up to the counter. Do you want the insurance? Do you want, any of this? No, I'm good. That could be a problem depending on how you have your own personal insurance set up. A lot of times you can get liability covered from your personal insurance program, extended to, so if you hit another vehicle, but there's typically not coverage for the actual vehicle that you're in. So all this comes down to is how are you setting up the strategy? How are you designing it? And just thinking, I guess, before you start inviting these things to your life. And,
awesome.
If you're lucky enough, like my wife, she gets to plan a vacation with me. These are things we talk about before we go out and rent a car.
You're such a nerd, Nick.
Yeah, only in this aspect.
I
know. The fifth thing is is kind of all encompassing, but it's really insufficient liability limits.
Yeah.
And really poor kind of policy structure and design.
Yeah.
And so there's I guess there's 1,000 different ways that you could structure it depending on what you're trying to accomplish. But the idea is that they're legal contracts, the insurance policies are. So it's written out what you can do and what you can't do and what's covered and what's not covered. So the idea is understanding, how to structure the policy, but then also making sure that you have the correct limits. So for example, one of the key, I guess, I don't call it factors, but typically when you're looking at an insurance umbrella policy, one of the best ways to start is what's your net worth. That's kind of the assets that you're trying to protect. So let's start with that number. Now, we could probably spend an hour just doing a video on that. At what point of your career are you in? How much longer do you have to work? So take that and start with that number, I guess. But now that umbrella policy is going to require that if you have an ATV and you have insurance on it, there's going to be minimum limits that policy has to have in order to be added to the umbrella. So somebody may or may, if they go out and they get the ATV policy, but it has insufficient limits, then they can't add it to the umbrella policy. So everything kind of connects and is tied together. And that's, again, one of the top 5 threats to your wealth is that you didn't design the policy correctly and you do not have the correct limit to protect your wealth, really protect your success and the lifestyle that you're living.
That's awesome, man. Well, so guys, if anybody has any comments, questions, thoughts around this, leave them in the comment section below. I do my best to respond to every comment.
I'm impressed by that.
Yeah. I try.
Yeah.
I enjoy it. Honestly, I sit in bed at night and I just look at the comments and I go crazy. But you know what? Nick is going to be watching the comments. He'll engage. And if you have any questions, Nick, what's your email? People can email you.
Yeah. So it's nick@riskmngr.com. So risk manager, but spelled mngr.com, or you can go to riskmanager.com as well.
Okay, rock and roll. So guys, if you need to get a hold of him, go ahead. You can also reach me, Chris at life180.com. If you have any questions, I'm happy to make the intro as well. But I think these are really important. I know this is outside of the realm of normalcy that we normally talk about, but I really want this channel to be all about like really full comprehensive financial education. And you really can't do that without bringing this risk management stuff into the conversation. So if you found value in that, please hit the like button. If you haven't already, hit the subscribe button. Make sure you click the bell. That way you get notified every time I launch a new video. And until next video, have a blessed, inspirational day. We'll talk soon. See ya.